Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box. Now, Sublime from Long Beach only had three albums, and it was their third and final album that was both their swan song, but also the album that introduced most of the world to Sublime. Now, their music was very much its own style. Now, it is true that a kind of ska rock revival, if you will, in the 90s was definitely taking place. Think of bands like the Mighty Bosstones and things like that. But Sublime, I would not necessarily put in that category. They incorporated elements of ska, but I think what they really were a product of the interesting musical and sociological changes happening in places like Long Beach. Now, Long Beach has always been a place where musical styles meet. Think the band War. Why can't we be friends? Lowrider, Cisco Kids, Spill the Wine. It was a band of mainly black jazz musicians who incorporated elements of Latin music and who, on their first two albums, had an English rock star, but with a bluesy background doing the vocals. It was a real interesting mix of styles. And there were so many underground Long Beach bands that had similar sort of influences where cultures musically connected, but almost at an unconscious level. And what do I mean by that? Well, Sly and the Family Stone were a consciously black and white band. They said, we appeal to all audiences, we have a message of racial harmony, and we're going to play funky soul music, but that will also appeal to rock and roll audiences. The Long Beach sound, whether in the 70s with bands like War or in the 90s, was something very different. And you can tell with Sublime that there was just a genuine fusion of sounds that was done unintentionally because they grew up in a very musically rich area, which in the 90s was exploding mainly because of hip hop. You had an amazing Long Beach hip hop scene, which became an important part of the growing West Coast hip hop scene that came to rule by the mid 90s. Think, the most famous son of Long Beach, Snoop Dogg, but also Warren G, Nate Dogg, so many others. And Sublime came into this mix as they looked and smelled like a white rock band from the 90s, which meant that they were much harder edged and without the sort of melodic tendencies of the AOR or hard rock of white 80s radio. But in being that, they were so much different than your typical sort of rock band of the era because there were reggae elements, there was a clear hip hop influence, there was this ska, and it came together to make something very, very unique that, except for the copycats later on in the 90s, hasn't really been repeated again. It's one of the most important albums of the decade, one of the most important bands of a decade when the musical tectonic plates were shifting from a rock dominated culture to a hip hop dominated culture. And this album came out right in the middle of that. As always, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.